things to be done prior to the collection of sample. So there is a specimen referral form which is available. In India, it is available from the Indian Council of Medical Research. Similarly, in different countries, the specimen referral form will be different. So that has to be filled up. So initially, the ICMR encouraged to fill the hard copy of the specimen referral form, but now it is encouraged to fill the form electronically. Then before you go on to collect the sample, the viral transport medium should be properly labeled with a 2-level identifier, that is with the name of the patient as well as the registration number of the patient. Then you have to don the PPE, because we have tomorrow a full session of how to don the PPE. So I am skipping this step. But to be what is to be emphasized here, that the PPE needed for sample collection is a full component PPE, including the N95 mask or the compatible respirator, eye protection, goggles, face mask, then your impervious plastic full length apron, then 2 pairs of gloves as well as boot cover. It's a full component PPE which is required for sample collection. And always remember, these viral transport medium tubes are to be refrigerated. Do take out the tubes only when you are planning the sample collection. Then the next, so these are the materials required. So already I have told about the PPE. The sample collection kit consists of your viral transport medium and 2 flexible swabs. These are the swab sticks, one for the nasopharyngeal and other for the oropharyngeal or the throat swab. Then the sample packaging kit consists of a falcon tube, then a Ziploc pouch, and the third container is a plastic container. So that makes this is a triple layer packaging. Then finally, for the transport, you need to have a thermocol box with some ice packs inside, so that your cold chain can be maintained. Apart from that, you need some stationery like parafilm or a sellotape, so that you can seal the cap of the VTM. Apart from that, you need the specimen referral form, which is again the country specific. So because this is the form designed by ICMR and you may not be getting these forms, so there is no point in training on these forms. These are all country specific forms. So here the patients, the demographic details as well as the clinical features are to be filled. Either these forms can be filled as the hard copy or even electronically. So regarding the specification of a swab, we have to use only synthetic fiber swabs with plastic or wire swabs. Do not use calcium alginate swabs or cotton swabs with wooden swabs, because these swabs contain inhibitory agents which interfere with the PCR testing. Also, they can inactivate the viruses. When we are collecting both nasopharyngeal as well as oropharyngeal swabs, both the swabs should be combined with single VTM tube. Doing this, not only we use save the reagents, also sensitivity of the test is also maximized. So what are the recommended specimens? The upper respiratory tract specimens, either a nasopharyngeal swab or oropharyngeal swab. Even as you have heard Dr. Misra in the previous lecture, nasal swabs, though it is less technically demanding than nasopharyngeal swab, it also performs equally good. And the only thing here I want to emphasize is that the CDC has even told that in order to minimize the usage of PPE, the nasal swab can also be self-collected. So if sufficient, the person whose sample has to be collected is sufficiently guided, even collected nasal swabs are acceptable. And then in hospitalized patients with confirmed COVID-19 infection, we have to repeat the test so that we can demonstrate the viral clearance, and which further can say when the patient can be discharged. So when we are planning repeat sample collection, it is always a upper respiratory tract sample. That means either nasopharyngeal or oropharyngeal swab that should be collected. What is the frequency? If the patient is symptomatic, the sample collection should be after the clinical recovery. However, if there is in the absence of symptoms, The swab collection should be repeated every second to fourth day until we get 2 consecutive negative results collected 24 hours apart. So what about the lower respiratory tract specimens? They are also acceptable. For patients who develop a productive cough, they should be encouraged to give the sputum sample. However, the induction of sputum, because it is an aerosol generating procedure, is not recommended. For patients who are intubated, the endotracheal aspirate or bronchoalveolar lavage can be a specimen. So for all these lower respiratory tract samples, they can be collected in the sterile leak-proof and the screw cap dry container. There is no need to put these samples to the viral transport medium. So regarding the collection of nasopharyngeal swab, I have shared the video link also. So here the key points are, we have to use the plastic flexible swab. We have to insert the swab to the nostril parallel to the palate till the resistance is left. So this distance is equal to, a rough estimate of this distance is the distance between the ear and the nostril. Once that much distance has been traversed and a resistance is felt, the swab is allowed to stay in place for some seconds, at least 15 to 20 seconds, then it is taken out. It is not recommended to swab both in the 2 nostrils if there is sufficient sample has been obtained within 1 swab. So collection of oropharyngeal swab or throat swab, we have to tilt the patient's head at an angle of 70 degrees. We have to collect the rub the swab over both the tonsillar pillars and the posterior pharyngeal wall, and taking utmost care so that the swab doesn't touch the tongue, teeth as well as the gums. And once the swab is collected, immediately the swab has to be put in the viral transport medium. So if we are planning to collect both nasal as well as oropharyngeal swabs, so both the swab sticks should be put into 1 VTM. So this point I have already emphasized also. Regarding the collection of nasal swab, which is less technically demanding compared to nasopharyngeal swab, here it is the swab is inserted into the 1 nostril until you make the resistance at the turbinates. Hold on there for 15 to 20 seconds, gently rubbing the swab against the nasal mucosa. Take out the swab and repeat the same step again in the other nostril. So a single swab is used to be sampled both the nares, and that swab should again be put into the viral transport medium. So this is about the sample collection. Regarding packaging, as you can see, this person is wearing the full component PPE and this is the swab stick. She is putting that into the tube of the viral transport medium, and the length of the swab stick is more than the length of the VTM tube. So the extra portion of the shaft has to be broken or cut. It should not be bent and put inside the tube of the viral transport medium, because during sample processing, if you have really bent the swab, it spills over. Next step in packaging, this is the viral transport medium to which the swab stick has already been put. This has to be tightly sealed either with a paraffin or a sellotape, in order to avoid leakage of the viral transport medium during transport of the sample to the laboratory. The third step, the viral transport medium goes inside the falcon tube. Then subsequently this falcon tube goes inside the Ziploc pouch. Then the whole assembly goes inside a plastic box, which again is transported in a thermocol box having ice pack so that we maintain the cold chain during transport. Regarding storage and transport, particularly for the laboratory, which are far away, particularly for the collection centers which are far away from the lab, this sample can be, if up to 72 hours delay is anticipated, 2 to 8 degrees centigrade storage is acceptable. If more delay is expected, more than 72 hours, it is better to store the specimens at minus 70 degrees centigrade or below. And one thing has to be remembered is that do not put the specimen referral form inside the thermocol box, but pack it in another separate Ziploc pouch. So what are the sample rejection criteria? First is your unlabeled VTM. Put very much emphasis on leveling of the VTM, because if you have not leveled the viral transport medium tube, it is very difficult to identify which patient it belongs to. Sometimes people have collected the swab and they do not put into the VTM. The virus doesn't remain viable in a dry swab. So dry swab is a rejection criteria. Leakage of VTM. If the VTM, the screw cap is not properly tightened, there is every chance that it will leak during the transport. And this leakage of VTM is a rejection criteria again. Incomplete specimen referral form, or very important, if the cold chain is not maintained during transport. So that is again a very much important step to ensure that cold chain is maintained during transport of the sample till receipt in the laboratory. Then already in the previous lecture it was emphasized what is inadequate sample. So though in the slide I have shown that in order to concern the uses of PPE, the CDC has encouraged self-sampling, but in our setting it has not worked. So till now we are not encouraging self-sampling. So what happens if the nasal swab or the oropharyngeal swab doesn't contain sufficient host material? Then report comes as no RNSP detected or sample inadequate. So that is again in this scenario there is a repeat sample collection which not only delays the result, also there is wastage of resources. So another thing, do not put specimen referral form inside the box. It has to be kept separate in a transparent Ziploc pouch. However, this problem will not arise if the government wants the soft copy or the computerized entry of the specimen referral form. So this, mainly the references are taken from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare website of Government of India, as well as the CDC reference. Thank you. Any questions you can ask?
Hello.
Yes.
This is Dr. Farhat from Bangladesh. I'm
Yes.
from Dhaka Medical College Hospital. So I'm just wondering to just ask a question that what is the sensitivity of self testing of or self collecting nasal swabs?
There are, see, these are all publication based studies. So it side to side variation is very much seen. So in our setting, it has not worked. So we are not encouraging self sample collection. It totally depends if we are telling a healthcare worker to self sample or if you are telling an illiterate man to self sample. So there will be differences. So until that is standardized, better to avoid self-sampling. What I showed as for the CDC, their setting, our setting is entirely different. So for now, we are not encouraging self-sampling.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, madam.
Yes. Good afternoon.
I am Professor Malik from Nepal.
Yes.
Just I want to know about this viral transplant medium. What is this medium actually?
The viral transport medium consists of various buffers and stabilizing agents. So this viral transport medium is ready-made available from different manufacturing companies. So the entire composition of the viral transport medium, a buffering solution, then the fetal bovine serum, some antibiotics. There is a link from CDC how it can be prepared in-house if the commercial preparations are exhausted. Even CDC has also told if there is local supply of VTM is exhausted, we can have other options like sterile saline, image transport medium. But for now, viral transport medium is commercially available. If not available, there is a composition which is given by CDC. It can be prepared in-house also.
Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. Hello,
Yes.
ma'am. I am Dr. Niranjan
Yes,
from
yes.
Nepal. I am Dr.
Yes.
Niranjan from Nepal.
Yes, yes.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes, it's audible. You can ask the question.
Yeah, my question is, madam,
Yes.
two COVID-19 kind of viruses can be reproduced artificially it's enemy viruses?
I'm not getting the question.
My question is, to COVID-19 kind of viruses, can we reproduce artificially its enemy viruses?
I'm really not getting the question. You can text me, so I'll go through and answer it later maybe.
Madam, another one question is mine. How much DNA was used for native barcoding SARS-CoV-2 NT protocol?
Hello, can you text me the
Madam?
question? I'm not, if the voice is very broken, kindly text me the question, so I'll go through it and answer.
Madam, am I audible, madam? Am I audible?
You are audible, but once you are asking the question in between.
Inadequate sample.
Yes.
If any result give inadequate sample, should we use the kit that was testing for? Is it reusable, or the testing kit is damaged?
No. See, this depends like which one. If the result is reported as inadequate, everything is wasted, starting from your RNA extraction kit to the PCR reagents. We cannot reuse anything. We have to go for a repeat sample collection. Nothing can be used.
Madam, as the testing kit is too much costly for our nation like India and Bangladesh or other the Southeast Asian countries.
No, I understand. But if you have attended to the first lecture carefully, if you have seen how the test progresses, there is no way that you can revive the reagents. Okay, these are all thrown. Okay, so we have to put very much emphasis on proper sample collection.
Thank you, madam.
If there are no more questions, we'll close the session. We are moving to the next session within 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
All the hospitals has enormous capacity to behave as a hotspot itself. So the robust infection prevention control activities or practices should be in place so that the healthcare facility or the hospital should not behave itself as a hub for amplification of COVID-19 events. So based on that, so how the infection prevention practices, they are the 5-pronged approaches as stated by the WHO. First is triage, early recognition and source control. Second is application of standard precautions for all patients at all times. Then adopting to droplet contact precautions as well as airborne precautions during aerosol generating procedures. There are so many administrative controls and environmental engineering controls which has to be put to manage this COVID-19. So we'll discuss this 5-pronged strategy one by one. Before that, we should understand little bit about the routes of transmission of the SARS coronavirus 2 in healthcare settings. So as it's similar to other respiratory viruses, this virus is also transmitted by droplets. These droplets are generated when an infectious person coughs, sneezes, or even talks. So these droplets are generally heavier. They have a diameter of more than 5 micron, and they travel a distance of less than 1 to 2 meters. So if these droplets are directly they fall on the nose, mouth, or the eyes of the susceptible individual, then the person gets the infection. Otherwise, these droplets they can transmit it through the hands of infected individuals if they are fail to practice proper hand hygiene and subsequent transmitted to other patients, or these droplets they can get deposited as fomites on inanimate surfaces, and in absence of environmental cleaning, through indirect contact transmission, it can transmit to the susceptible individuals. A big question mark is there on whether this SARS coronavirus 2 can be transmitted through airborne route. Though strictly it is not in the airborne route transmission, but close range aerosol transmission is possible if these droplets are generated in a room, in a closed room in which there is air recirculation is happening and aerosol generating procedure have generated the aerosols, then close range aerosol more than 2 to 3 meter also, this virus has been shown to survive. So the main routes of transmission are droplets. Second is contact, both direct as well as indirect. Then third is your close range aerosol transmission, though it is not a strictly airborne transmission. So depending upon that, our infection prevention and control activities should target to break the chain of transmission via these routes of transmission. So as I told, there will be a 5-pronged strategy of the infection prevention and control activities. The first and foremost is triage, early recognition and source control. So how to make that happen? We have to ensure a workable system for assessing all the patients at admission. Therefore, it allows us for early recognition of possible COVID-19, then immediate isolation of these patients with suspected disease in an area separate from other patients. So that is known as source control. So how in AIIMS Bhubaneswar we have done that? So there will be a screening at OPD entry and another screening at the patients attending the emergency. That is called the first level screening, and the first level screening is done by the medical social workers who wear the surgical mask, and also the patients who are presenting to the OPD or to the emergency by government notifications, they are also told to wear either cloth mask or some surgical mask. So there is a two questions which are asked to them either at the OPD entry or as well as at the emergency entry. There is about the symptoms like fever and cough or shortness of breath, and a travel history or history of contact with a confirmed case. If answer to all of these questions are no, then they are allowed to enter to the normal OPD or the green zone of the emergency, which is the non-respiratory zone of the emergency. However, if answer to each of this, any of this question is yes, these patients are not allowed to enter to the normal OPD or the emergency. So they are screened to another respiratory OPD, which is also which carries out the second level screening. So the second level screening is done by the healthcare workers who screens the patient using the questionnaire which are given to us by the Indian Council of Medical Research. Basically, we ask for them for all the symptoms like fever, cough, breathlessness, and if they are symptomatic individuals with travel history, or if they are symptomatic contacts of a lab confirmed case, or they are symptomatic healthcare worker. The fourth is influenza-like illness in patients from the ministry identified hotspot areas, severe acute respiratory illness, or in the only asymptomatic who are sampled are the asymptomatic direct and high risk contact of a laboratory confirmed case. So the second level screening is also important, and if answer to any of this question is yes, so they are the COVID suspects and they are proceeded for the sample collection. Again, from this level of patients, if it is an asymptomatic contact, after the sample collection, the patient is encouraged for home quarantine. If it is mild to moderate cases, they are usually admitted in the single room isolation rooms. If the severe cases, they are admitted in separate ICUs. So as you can see, the first step is triage. That means you are assessing all the patients who are coming to our hospital at admission. Subsequently, you are identifying those patients who need a sample collection, and you are isolating all these cases so there is no mix-up. So that is your first step of your infection prevention and control activities. So there are some photographic visuals. The stage 1 screening process, which happens both at the OPD entrance gate as well as the severe cases at the emergency entrance. This is a 2-level questionnaire with the history of travel and the symptomatic history. And the patients who are after the first level of screening, who are found to have some respiratory symptoms or some travel history, they go for the second stage screening, where the sample collection happens and they are kept in isolation. So after the second stage screening, the patients who come from far away, they are isolated in a separate area, making 2-meter distance between the beds, and the patient is asked to keep on given a face mask and is asked to put it on. And ideally, there have to be single person room isolation rooms, but in case of unavailability, at least a spatial separation in between the beds and the well ventilated room is also acceptable. Whereas the severe cases who are admitted to the hospital, who are COVID suspects, pending confirmation of their reports, they are separated in a separate ward known as the isolation ward. Ideally, the single room isolation having the negative pressure is desirable, but our hospitals are not geared up for that. So all suspected cases, maintaining the spatial separation, they are admitted. The healthcare workers posted, their limited number of healthcare workers are posted, and they are given the full PPE to attend to those patients, and they are trained to adhere to the standard contact and droplet precautions. So the second prong approach is applying standard precautions for all patients. These are the components of standard precautions. Hand hygiene. So today is 5th May, the World Hand Hygiene Day. So the reinforcement of 5 moments of hand hygiene, respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette, PPE, personal protective equipment, according to your risk assessment. So this point will be elaborating further which PPE is required according to which procedure, safe handling, cleaning and disinfection of patient care equipment, mainly have dedicated However, in case the dedicated equipments are not available, how to disinfect when subsequent patient uses, environmental cleaning, handling and cleaning of the soil, linen, biomedical waste management, safe injection practices, SARS and So these are the elements of standard precautions, and we have to ensure that these are applied for all patients at all areas of the hospital. So this is the 5 moments of hand hygiene. Everybody must be aware. So alcohol-based hand rubs are preferred. Only we should go for hand wash when the hands are visibly soiled. The second component is your respiratory hygiene and cough etiquette. So all the patients who are coming to the hospital, they are encouraged to wear a cloth mask or surgical mask if available. Whenever they are coughing or sneezing, they are asked to use the tissues, or they have to sneeze to the elbow, not so that they avoid the hand contamination. And after that, the mask as well as the cloth cover should be discarded in proper biomedical waste container. Then hand hygiene after contact with respiratory secretions. So these steps are mostly to be taken by the patients, because many patients who are coming to the hospital are coming with the upper respiratory tract symptoms. So as a component of the source control, every patient is encouraged to have a cloth mask, and if it is a COVID suspect, a surgical mask is given to the patient. So the third component is rational use of personal protective equipment. The entire class of personal protective equipment is tomorrow about the uses, how to don the PPE, how to discard the PPE. So that I will be not touching here, but mainly how to rationalize the use of PPE. So if it's a triage area where there is only we need to practice hand hygiene as well as medical masks. We do not need these gowns or respirators and goggles in the triage area. However, when we are going for the collection of the specimens for laboratory diagnosis, it's a full component PPE. Their medical mask is not acceptable. You have to go for a respirator, that is the N95 mask. If you are caring to a suspected or confirmed case of COVID-19 where no aerosol generating procedure is anticipated, all components of the PPE except N95, whereas when you are going for an aerosol generating procedure, again the N95 or respirator is advised. So we have to rationalize use of PPE. Why? Because this COVID-19 is going to stay with us for a long. So every hospital, while catering to the safety of the healthcare workers, must judiciously use these resources. So one way to maintain this PPE, though it is not part of the infection control, but if you do not have the adequate stock, you cannot provide to your staffs. There is a PPE burn rate calculator which is available by CDC, in which there is basically it is an Excel sheet. You can enter your all kinds of PPE, how many stocks you are available with you, like how many gowns are available, how many gloves, how many masks, how many respirators. Then you have to enter the total number of suspected or confirmed patients. So that is a tool which can calculate how many PPEs of each category you need per day and how many days your stock is going to last. So that gives you an idea how frequently you have to order these things. The next most important thing is environmental cleaning, because in the route of transmission we discussed, these droplets once generated, they can survive in the environmental surfaces for long. So the high-touch surfaces, the floor, the wall, ceiling, the used linen, the toilet, corridor, the non-critical equipment, there is a chance of fomites persisting there, which can transmit to the subsequent patients. So the cleaning and decontamination and disinfection of these are very important. The high-touch surfaces, I'll be elaborating what are the high-touch surfaces. 0.5% freshly prepared sodium hypochlorite for a contact time of 10 minutes every 4 hourly is the frequency of cleaning. So we have to assign some housekeeping staffs for this environmental cleaning only. If the floor again the 0.5% hypochlorite for 10 minutes, however the periodicity is less, that is once per shift. Wall and ceiling, they do not have that much rest, so it is once daily also is acceptable. Linen we'll discuss in the subsequent slides. Even for the corridors also, hypochlorite now 0.5% 8 hourly, that is per shift. Non-critical equipment, better to have dedicated stethoscope, BP cuff, thermometer for individual patients. However, if it is not available, then alcohol wipes can be used after each use. So what are the high-touch surfaces? The bedside rails, the pillow covers, the telephones, then the side tables, IV stands, those are the high-touch surfaces. So these high-touch surfaces has to be cleaned and disinfected with 0.5% hypochlorite every 4 hourly or earlier. So then cleaning of the linens, that is also very important. The soiled linen, they have to be packed separately in clearly labeled leak-proof bags. So either the hospital purchases an industrial grade washing machine. So in this there is a washing cycle, initial hot water wash cycle of 60 to 90 degrees centigrade with laundry detergent. Then the hot cycle, after the hot cycle wash, the linen has to be soaked in 0.1% sodium hypochlorite for approximately 30 minutes, followed by a rinse in water. So this linen management also assumes very much significance in the context of COVID-19. So what exactly is terminal disinfection in relation to COVID-19? So once the patient is discharged or if the patient dies, so before that room is allotted to any subsequent patient, there should be terminal disinfection. However, here the CDC and WHO doesn't support the practice of routine disinfectant-based fogging. There are newer technologies which are being evaluated like ozone, vaporized hydrogen peroxide. Though they can be used, however, this has to be done only when the rooms are not occupied. This cannot be and should not be done when the room is occupied by a patient, and whoever is doing the fogging, the healthcare worker, also needs to have full PPE for protection of the mouth, nose as well as eyes, because these aerosols are harmful. So the terminal disinfection checklist is also available from CDC. Since these are usually used for terminal disinfection once the room is occupied by MRSA patients, however the same can be used so that you can have a checklist. You can so somebody has cleaned all the high-touch surfaces with hypochlorite solution 0.5% and a contact time of 10 minutes is allowed. Regarding biomedical waste management also, there are separate modules which will be covering, but the main points which I want to emphasize is that all the waste generated from the COVID isolation rooms as well as from the COVID labs has to be collected by healthcare workers who have been given this PPE, and these waste are collected with a double layer biohazard bags. They are transported in a separate trolley in which there is a level of COVID-19 waste. Okay, and once this that is transported, the outside of the buckets also has to be disinfected with 1% hypochlorite solution. So again, emphasizing on the transmission-based precautions. So for all cases of suspected or confirmed case of COVID-19, we have to use the standard precaution. Along with that, contact precautions, that is gowns and gloves, and droplet precautions, that is surgical mask as well as the eye protection. However, when the aerosol generating procedures are to be done, in case instead of this droplet, we have to take airborne precautions, that is N95 mask and the filter-based respirators. So what are the aerosol generating procedures for which airborne precautions to be taken? So they are the endotracheal intubation, extubation, manual ventilation, open suctioning, CPR, bronchoscopy, surgery and postmortem procedures in which high-speed devices are used, all dental procedures, non-invasive ventilation, CPAP, BiPAP, high-frequency oscillatory ventilation, induction of sputum. And the procedures like obtaining diagnostic nose and throat swabs, administration of medication via nebulization, and administration of pressurized humidified oxygen are also aerosol generating procedures. So whenever these procedures are performed, the airborne precautions has to be taken. The better this procedure should be carried out in a negative pressure room, but the negative pressure room, as we understand, may not be available in all the areas. So adequate PPE has to be, including the N95 mask, eye protection, and the face shield should be worn when these aerosol generating procedures are performed. So then the next question comes, what is the total duration of contact and droplet precautions? For how much duration this should be followed? So until the patient is discharged from the hospital, standard precautions should be applied all times. Additional contact and droplet precautions should continue until the patient is asymptomatic. However, once the patient is asymptomatic, whether we should follow these contact and droplet precautions and whether we should follow airborne precautions, that is more comprehensive information is lacking. So till the patient is symptomatic, we have to follow standard contact as well as droplet precautions, and we have to continue the standard precautions till the patient is in the hospital. So regarding there is one slide about the extended use of N95. This N95 and the respirators, when the healthcare workers are catering to the same group of patients, suppose there are several suspected patients of COVID-19, they can continuously use for 4 to 8 hours without removing. So that is known as the extended use of N95. However, they should discard the gloves. You cannot really care for the subsequent patients using the same pair of gloves. However, using the N95 respirator up to a shift of 8 hours is permitted. There are certain exceptions. You should discard the N95 during aerosol generating procedures, or if the outside is contaminated with secretions, blood, or respiratory or body fluids. If you are going to perform any aerosol generating procedure with the N95 respirator, then one cleanable face shield can be applied over the N95 respirator, and once this N95 respirator is damaged, then it is discarded. So extended use means you can use the N95 respirator for an extended length of time, that is up to 8 hours, between subsequent patient handlings without discarding the respirator. So the decontamination and reuse of N95 respirator has also been addressed. As per CDC, a particular healthcare staff can be issued a total of 5 N95 masks at the beginning of the month. So on the day one after he has used it, he has to store it properly in a bag one, which is a cleanable, which is a clean bag and in a well aerated place, and he should not use that for the next 4 days. On the 5th day again, he can use the same mask. Similarly, if this 5 masks are given to him, so up to a total 25 days, up to 1 month, he can use this 5 masks, then he can discard. So between subsequent uses of a single mask, there should be at least 4 days of gap. So that is just the crisis capacity or the strategy to reuse strategy of the N95 to cater to the shortage of the N95 masks. The decontamination strategy as a crisis capacity has also been addressed by the CDC. The vaporous hydrogen peroxide as well as the ultraviolet germicidal irradiation, they have been known to decontaminate the N95 mask even up to 30 cycles. So that is also being used for various hospitals. So there are certain additional infection prevention practices which has to be taken in mechanically ventilated patients, which will be elaborated further during the management session. The broad highlights are avoiding the use of non-invasive positive pressure ventilation with vented mask, recommending the use of single patient use circuits, prevent and discourage reuse of these circuits. Preferable closed suction is preferred. Place the HEPA filter in both inspiratory as well as the expiratory end of the ventilator, and routine ventilator surface disinfection with 70% ethanol or hydrogen peroxide wipes. There are situations like there are guidelines available now from the Indian Society of Anesthesiologists regarding emergency surgery in suspected or confirmed COVID-19 patients. So though the elective surgery has to be avoided as far as possible, but the emergency surgery has to be taken up. So there should be dedicated COVID-19 operation theatre. All staff should be in full PPE and minimize the staffs with clear delineation of their roles and responsibilities, because most of our OTs operate in a positive pressure. So in the absence of negative pressure of operation theatre complex or in the absence of laminar airflow facility, there are portable HEPA carbon photocatalysis air purification system available, which can serve as a means of source control. Then a minimum of 1 hour gap should be given between subsequent surgeries so that adequate decontamination of all high-touch surfaces should be achieved. medium risk exposure, if there is a prolonged close contact, this prolonged means mainly more than 15 minutes of close contact with a patient of COVID-19, including in the pre-symptomatic period. However, the patient was wearing mask, but the healthcare worker was not wearing adequate PPE. So that is medium risk exposure. So the high risk exposure is the same category of medium risk exposure. However, here the patient was without mask. Or if a healthcare worker was present in a room where aerosol generating procedure was performed, including if the patient was not that time symptomatic and the healthcare worker was without PPE, that is a high risk exposure. So how to manage our healthcare personnel who are having this high or medium or low risk exposure? If the patient was not wearing his mask and the healthcare worker was not wearing any PPE, then it's a high risk exposure. That means the healthcare worker has to be excluded from work for 14 days after the last exposure. Active monitoring means the monitoring of the body temperature and or any COVID-19 compatible symptoms which should be communicated to the authority through the hospital authority. And the the next category is if the healthcare worker was not wearing adequate PPE and there was no source control. That is also active exposure, which excludes work exclusion for a 14 days quarantine period. However, if the healthcare worker was not wearing gloves and he has not come in contact with the patients, or there is no body fluid exposure. So this is a low risk exposure where there is 14-day quarantine is not applicable. So as you can see in the subsequent slides, so much emphasis is being given to the patient wearing a face mask or the patient is wearing a cloth mask at least, so that if the source control is achieved. Even the patient when is wearing face mask and the healthcare worker is not wearing PPE, that is a medium risk exposure. Whereas in the previous slide, if the patient is not wearing face mask and the healthcare worker is not wearing PPE, that is a high risk exposure. So what is to be done in case of low risk exposure? If a healthcare worker has a low risk exposure, then there is no work restriction, only self-recording of the temperature twice a day or symptoms compatible with COVID-19, he has to report to the authority. However, if it is a high or medium risk exposure, there should be active monitoring of the healthcare worker by the state or local public health authority. So keeping in mind all these things, what are the real challenges when implementing the IPC practices? The real challenge is asymptomatic transmission, which has been labeled as the Achilles heel of current strategies to control COVID-19. Because once initial slides we discussed, we are triaging all patients based on some symptoms. But if the patient is able to transmit the virus before he is symptomatic, that means the pre-symptomatic transmission. So in the pre-symptomatic phase also, there is detectable level of RNA in respiratory samples. Even the viable virus is detectable in the respiratory samples. Can the patient transmit in the pre-symptomatic stage? Yes. It can transmit as a droplet. It can transmit as a natural aerosol which are generated during talking or singing. It can transmit whenever any aerosol generating procedure is suspected. So, keeping in mind, though this is not in guideline, the NEJM in the April 20th issue is that they have come up with the opinion, because in the pre-symptomatic phase also transmission can occur. They have recommended that testing of patients without symptoms may be performed, because these are countries, each state or country may not have that much capacity, but this is a recommendation for them. If all patients of pre-operative screening, patients of pregnant patients at the time of delivery, patients who are unable to provide medical or exposure history, or patients when they live in a high-risk setting, including long-term care facility or community surveillance activities. This is different, but in the hospitalized setting, they recommend, because the pre-symptomatic transmission is a possibility, to screen all the patients pre-operatively during pregnancy at the time of delivery. So these are the recommendations by the authors, but how the country is geared up to take those recommendations, only time will tell. Then the other challenges is, because it is now proven that this closed range aerosol transmission is possible of this COVID-19, not necessarily airborne. So how to convert our single patient room or single ICUs into having some airborne control? They have recommended this heating ventilation air conditioning system, so be a non-circulatory type, provision of an independent exhaust blower to extract the room air, and after exhaust air treatment, at least 12 air changes per hour in a room where aerosol generating procedure has to be performed. A negative pressure of minimum 2.5 Pascal or more, preferably more than 5 also advisable if there is aerosol generating procedures are going to be performed. So any exhaust air room from COVID-19 patient area cannot be adjusted to the outside corridor to other area or to other area of the hospital. They should again be filtered by HEPA or by chemical disinfection with 1% hypochlorite, or you can have an upward plumb with a height of 3 meters and above the tallest part of the building, or by UV irradiation. But these are the real challenges which are to be implemented in a hospital. There are many hospitals which are not in a position to adhere to these guidelines if pre-symptomatic transmission is a possibility. So these are the real challenges in implementing infection prevention and control practices. So to summarize my lecture, there is enough potential of this healthcare facility in amplification of COVID-19 as super spreader events. So in order to prevent that, we have to implement a combination of droplet and contact precautions in all patient care area of the facilities, universal implementation of triage procedures, rapid diagnosis and isolation, administrative controls, controlling the flow patterns and procedures for patients, visitors, and staffs, engineering controls, isolation rooms, partitions to protect against respiratory droplets, and the ventilation systems is desirable. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we can take the questions now.
Yeah, I am Dr. Niranjan from Nepal. I would ask you a very one or two questions, madam, that is in my mind. One question is, can a person who has had coronavirus get infected again? It is my first question. And second question is, why not government of India and ICM are ready to follow the Kerala model? Because the mortality rate of Kerala is very low. Out of 500, there is only 3 patients die. Most of the patients are recovered. They are using 4 drugs. We know very well that 2 antiviral and other 2 SCQ and azithromycin. So what is the problem with us? Why not you are using these drugs broadly?
No, see, the first of all, the second question regarding the management, that will be taken up by Department of Pulmonary Medicine tomorrow. The first question what you asked is?
First question, can a person who has had coronavirus get infected again?
So the literature has supported that, because one person, if he has recovered also, they can get infected again because of the mutation of the virus and emergence of the new strain of the virus. But how severe the second infection will be, there is no much conclusive data, but yes, that is a possibility.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
I have a question. This
Yes.
is Dr. Farhat. Yes. So I'm just wondering to know that it is always necessary to put on a N95 whenever we examine a patient of a confirmed or suspected case of COVID-19?
No, only when you are anticipating aerosol generating procedures. But for all ENT surgeons or all anesthesia during induction or all tracheostomy where the aerosol generating CPR, all those aerosol generating procedure what I listed, it is recommended to have the N95 mask. But in the CDC in the last week, what they have told, because in the N95 mask is really is in a shortage, on alternative PPE, what they have told, two triple layer surgical mask along with face shield. Well, if N95 is not available. However, if it is available, it is ought to be one in all cases of aerosol generating procedures.
I have another question. Sorry, I'm taking time.
Yes,
So,
yes.
how can we disinfect the medical equipment like blood pressure machine? Because most of the hospitals in
So this
Bangladesh have
is
been using
those are
manual blood pressure machine. Yeah.
those are to be done after each use with the alcohol wipes. Either you can use the alcohol wipes which are ready-made available, or you can make your own alcohol wipes by the cotton swabs also.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other
Ma'am,
question?
I have a question. I would like to, yes, ma'am, I would like to ask you a question. Thanks for a
Yes.
nice presentation, ma'am. My
Thank you.
question is that we always, as a health professional, as a doctor, we tell our patients to the community level that to wash our hands with soap and water, with alcohol-based hand sanitizer. To the
Yes.
community level where these facilities are not available, what can we say to them? Even if they don't have soap and water, how to
No,
make
this
them disinfectant?
see that there is a WHO guideline to how to locally manufacture hand rub. So by this, the cost comes down at least like 10 times less. So the composition is either the combination is ethanol, the 70%, then hydrogen peroxide, then glycerol. So those are there is a WHO. If you Google that, the WHO guideline for the local production of hand rub, and if the hospital can make on their own, or that will be really cost cutting strategy so that it can be catered to your local needs. By that, the cost will come to 10 to 15 times lower.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Hello?
Is it audible?
Hi, madam.
Yes.
Madam, I have a question regarding the
Yes.
disinfectant of the blood pressure
Hello.
cuff machine, BP. BP machine cuff.
Okay.
Does we disinfected by the antiseptic spray like 60% alcohol spray?
Hello.
The 70% alcohol wipes are recommended for the disinfection of the blood pressure cuffs, because we cannot really use hypochlorite on them. This 0.5% hypochlorite will be detrimental to this cuff. So all these thermometers, blood pressure cuffs is equally can be done by the alcohol wipes, 70% alcohol wipes.
Can it be by the spray?
Hello, ma'am.
Yes,
Sorry.
yes, sure. Yes, spray also is acceptable.
Thank you, madam.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello,
Excuse me,
ma'am.
ma'am.
I am Dulal Kantirala from Bangladesh.
Yes, yes.
I have a question regarding hospital management. Many of our hospital doctor, nurse, and health worker are infected very much. But they are always maintaining their PPE marks and others. But why? What is the cause of this infection? And in maximum isolation center have no partition of distance one to another patient, distance 1 meter, no maintaining maximum hospital partition. But this is the reason. And what reason for infection infected for all?
The thing is that once a country has gone to the level of widespread community transmission, it is very difficult to say whether the healthcare worker acquired that infection in the hospital or in the community? That is the very pertinent question that has to be kept in mind. If your country is in a stage of widespread community transmission, then it will be very difficult to say whether a person or the healthcare worker acquired that from the hospital or really acquired from the community. Because if all these PPE, it is like the most important component of your PPE is your N95 mask or the respirator. If that is worn properly and all the steps are adhered to, it is very, I won't say it is impossible, but it is very rare to get the infection. Okay. So if it is the community transmission is happening at our place, it is not it is not easy to say that the healthcare worker got it from the hospital.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Let me ask you one question. Hello, sir. Hello.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes,
Hello,
yes,
ma'am.
yes, yes.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Abdul Qadir from Somalia.
Okay.
Just I'm going to ask you one question, and it is possible to use only normal water to prevent or kill this COVID-19 virus, or it is compulsory to use disinfectant like alcohol or soap?
No, it's not
Thank you,
clear.
ma'am.
Can you say it again?
I'm
Can
Abdul
you
Qadir from Somalia. Just I'm asking you one question, and it is compulsory to use normal disinfectant like alcohol or soap, or we can use only normal water to wash our hands to kill this virus.
So this is for this COVID-19, the SARS coronavirus 2. The disinfectants which are approved for this, not disinfectants, the antiseptics which are approved for the hand rub are the 70% alcohol. But this is also killed by if you wash your hand with a liquid soap or a bar soap. So it is, both are acceptable. It is not like that if you do not have this hand rub, you cannot practice hand hygiene. Hand wash is also equally effective.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
I'm Dr. Niranjan from Nepal. Again, I'm asking you a very simple question, madam.
Yes.
I'm a doctor. I'm a physician here.
Yes, yes.
I'm asking you, most of our doctor fraternity has very much panic. First,
Yes.
second thing, most of the doctors are doing work in India. They are infected. 400 doctors are infected. Most of my friends are infected in India of this COVID-19. They are very much into his health and all wearing the PPE and all etc. Whatever the guidelines of WHO and ICMR. But madam, what's the reason behind it? In India, there is no community spread of this disease. But why they are infected of this disease, madam?
Oh, this is a very tricky question to answer, but as far as we know, if a hospital is really providing the PPEs and the healthcare workers are really trained how to wear them properly and how to discard them, it should not happen.
But it is happening in India, madam. Most of my friends are working in AIMS. They are infected. They are working in Max Hospital because I did my MD from India. So there is many friends are working in your AIMS also. So now they are suffering to this problem.
Yeah, I'll just like to transfer this question. We'll discuss with Dr. Manoj if you would like to add. His question is, after wearing PPE also, the doctors at AIMS.
Yeah, Dr. Niranjan, thank you for the question.
Yeah. Thank you, doctor. I am very much panic regarding myself or my friends. They are doing 24-hour duty in COVID hospital. They are using all PPE, etc., which are guideline of ICMR. They are following all norms. But few of my friends are suffering to. They are infected with this disease. What is the reason behind it, doctor?
Yeah, but nobody is sure, neither they nor we actually sure what time they acquired the infections. They might have acquired the infections out of the duty hours also. So that nobody can pinpointly say. So that is a big question, and it will remain unanswered. And neither the sufferer who suffers from COVID-19, the healthcare worker, or neither the physicians to whom he will present will be able to know exactly why actually he acquired infection despite taking all due precautions while in work. That is one question. Second is, as we all know, that we are wearing PPE, but wearing PPE is not a foolproof protection unless we follow all the principles of donning and doffing, especially the doffing. The doffing has to be very meticulously done. Otherwise, you are likely to get infected during the process of doffing itself. So nobody is going. You or me cannot monitor, or you cannot monitor myself while I am doffing whether it was exactly perfect or not. I may be thinking I have done it perfectly, but it may not be all right always. So these are the issues how the healthcare workers are getting infected. That is what we can think from the infection, whatever we understand the dynamics of infections. From that point, I believe these are the possible way. Either they have acquired the infections during the off-duty hour scenario when they are moving hither and thither or somewhere else, or if the quarantine or the isolations has not been followed up stringently. That is one aspect. Secondly, during the process of the doffing. Or thirdly, sometimes it becomes very, very difficult for somebody to wear the PPE for a long period of time, like 6 hours or 8 hours. And inadvertently or unknowingly, we have done some breach in the protocol, like suppose you have removed the mask for some time for feeling uncomfortable breathing, or we have rubbed the eyes or nose or something like that. So these are the possible ways I can think of.
Okay, doctor. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Manoj.
Yeah, thank
Hello.
you.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
Hello.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, please go ahead with your
Hello,
question.
ma'am. I am Jewel Das Gupta.
Yeah, please go ahead with your question.
I'm Jewel Das Gupta, senior medical technologist from Bangladesh.
Yes,
Is there
yes.
any possibilities of inventing? Is there any possibilities of inventing any other new techniques to detect SARS-CoV-2 virus accurately as well as RT-PCR method? Because RT-PCR method takes too much time.
Some technologies are under validation, like loop-mediated isothermal amplification, the LAMP per se, but that also has its limitations. If the RT-PCR is time-taking, if all the steps are done manually. But as if you have listened to Dr. Misra's presentation, the GeneXpert machine, the cartridge, the SARS-CoV-2 Express cartridge, which accepts the nasopharyngeal swab and it requires minimum biosafety precautions. There is not so much of handling of the sample. Directly the VTM in which the nasopharyngeal swab has put. From that, the material is, the VTM is transported to the sample chamber of the cartridge of the GeneXpert, and the result is ready as quickly as 45 minutes. So if that is made available to all the countries at a nominal price, and where that much technical support or infrastructural support is not available, that can quickly turn up the results in within 1 hour you get the results. And in that, both screening as well as confirmatory is in a single step, in a single cartridge. Okay. So 1 hour is now not a time actually. Within 1 hour, if you can get the result, it's very quick. Is it clear? Is it?
Okay. Ma'am, one more question.
Yes.
What is the accuracy rate? Yes, rate in RT-PCR method.
So we can name the sensitivity and specificity, or exactly it is as in the previous lecture it was told, the sensitivity of the RT-PCR, it is like there is audible actually. Are you getting my voice?
Yes, I am getting.
So the most important thing is the dynamics of the viral shedding, depending upon the duration of illness. If the sample is collected in the first week of illness, that is within 1 to 7 days, or even in the pre-symptomatic period, and the sample is collected properly, then the sensitivity of the RT-PCR is up to 78% in the first week. Okay, so no test can be 100% sensitive. Regarding specificity, the primers which are used are specific to the SARS coronavirus 2. But as we can see, there are different companies and different automated, cartridge-based systems are available. Gradually, when all the systems will be compared, we will be in a real position to say which system performs better than the other.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
If there are no more questions, we can end the session.
Thank you all participants. And again, we request you all to join tomorrow by 3 p.m. again at the same time. We will be having the second sessions, the clinical management of the mild cases as well as the donning and doffing process. So thank you very much. Have a good day. Please join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. again.